This is the We Are Her podcast for survivors of abuse or assault to share their stories. I'm your host, Emily Kemp, and I'll be having a conversation with a different survivor each week. I want to be sure to include a strong trigger warning with this podcast. The content we discuss includes topics related to violence. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the We Are Her podcast.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for being with us today. And if you want to just take a quick second to introduce yourself, who you are, and a little bit about yourself so that our listeners know who they're listening to.
Sounds good. My name is Stacie. I live outside of Boulder, Colorado, and I am currently a single mom, or an only mom to two young kids. I had a very long career in retail design, and I am now kind of still doing that, but I'm self-employed and, still in that industry. Had the opportunity to start my own business in that world. So
cool.
That's kind of who I am and what I do.
Yeah. And before we kind of dive into things, I just want to give a disclosure that we are recording this during the great COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. We are using some technology so that we can all record remotely, and we are not face to face. So all of our listeners just kind of bear with us. Hopefully the sound quality is okay, but these are important conversations to have. So we are not going to stop having them just because of a freaking pandemic.
That's right.
And with that, I guess I'll just kind of turn it over to you, and feel free to kind of start sharing your story wherever you want to.
Okay. Let's see. My abuser is my late husband. And so this is kind of a twofold, I suppose, trauma for me, because not only was I kind of in the throes of trying to heal and learn and kind of better myself after surviving the violence, I then had this additional trauma of his suicide. Because of the situation. So,
right.
I'm about 10 months out from that, and, kind of in a good place with my healing journey, thanks to, a lot of amazing people in my life. So I think, what's so interesting for me is our story, our life together started. I was coming out of my first marriage, actually. And, that first marriage was kind of like what I think was more, I was in that marriage because it felt like the kind of socially appropriate or right thing to do. We definitely didn't really see eye to eye on what marriage was or what our future was. And I think that all stemmed from the fact that we never really had those tough conversations. We were in our 20s, and I think we both came from families or from places where you just didn't have those kinds of conversations. Everything got brushed under the rug. And, at some point I said, oh my goodness, like this, clearly we have some different ideas, and I need to leave this marriage. And that's what I did. In comes my late husband. We had actually worked together, and, had kind of reconnected as I was leaving that marriage, and thought, wow, like this relationship is amazing. It's something that I'd never experienced before in such a beautiful way, because he was this guy who was so upfront with me and so open. And, we came from very different backgrounds. We, grew up in very different worlds. And he was just so open and so expressive and so understanding and accepting. And, so new to me as somebody who wanted to talk and have the hard conversations about emotions and feelings. And he was really upfront about who he was and what he had been through. And
Right.
had really outlined his, ultimately traumas that he grew up with, which, he came from a very, very physically violent household. His mother was very physically abusive. I mean, things that you can't even imagine, somebody could do to a little kid.
Right.
He was sexually abused, and of course the emotional abuse always goes along with those two things. But his whole point, I guess, in life was that he wanted to kind of break that generational trauma. And, he really wanted kids. He really wanted a family. He really wanted a partner who he could be close to and open with. And, we kind of helped each other. They say, like, relationships, you find the people who can kind of help you heal those own traumas within yourself.
Mm.
And he did that for me. Like, I think I grew up with things like, body image issues, or like not always feeling good enough or smart enough. And he made me see myself in a different light and really helped me heal those parts of me. And, for him, he was always searching for this peace, right? He grew up in a very chaotic, turbulent family, extended family as well, moving a lot and just seeing different types of violence and abuse. And, so what I kind of brought to the table for him is I was somebody who was very deep into like yoga and meditation, and I was a runner, and so he started practicing all these things, and he was like, wow, like this feels good. This is helping me manage myself, self-regulate, helping manage anger or other issues that he had in his life.
What you're describing is like coming out of this first marriage, and like divorce, regardless of the circumstances, is pretty traumatic for people, and there are real feelings of like grief and loss there. You might be feeling particularly vulnerable at a certain point, and then this other person sort of like swoops in at the exact right moment and really was able to contrast, this other person in a way that like creates buy-in sort of immediately.
Absolutely. And I think we both did that for each other. He had come out of a marriage as well, and to kind of further extend some of his trauma, he had just come out of a marriage where they had a daughter together, and when his daughter was about 4 years old, his adopted father, probably the only consistent adult in his life, was dying. And his last words to my late husband were, I know other family members have said it, and I know it's hurt your relationship with them, but I'm dying, and I just have to say it. That little girl isn't yours. And when he was 4, when this little girl was 4, he took her for a DNA test and figured out, this little girl isn't mine. And, it took him a year to kind of decide what to do, and struggled, of course, with the grief of not only losing a marriage, but losing a daughter and losing that, what he was always searching for, which is family. And here he was losing it again. So here I come along. I am kind of different from the women he had dated before. I'm, stable. I have a good career. I'm this kind of quote unquote normalcy for him, and somebody who he could see building a future with. So, I think both of us just kind of fell into that place of like contrast and, I can heal in this somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
no, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, we then got pregnant with my son, and at that point he said, gosh, it's really important for me, given what I grew up in, that one of us is home with our kid, with our son. And, we had a lot of conversations about that, but I think my career not only had kind of more stability, and, I enjoyed what I did, and it made sense from a career point of view. I had kind of had more growth opportunity where I was. And, he was raised in a very large family. He was, his mother was one of 14 children. He was one of, 56 or something cousins at the time. So he loved kids, and he was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to stay home. I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad. And this was 12 years ago, so people didn't really do that as much, it was.
And they still don't, but it's definitely more acceptable than it is now. Or,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, and he got a lot of comments, things like, oh, you must be out of work. That's why you're doing it. Right. Or things like, oh, well, must be nice. I'd love it if, my woman could work all day and I could just stay at home. And of course, that's not who he was. He was an amazing father. He was incredibly attentive to our son and to me as well. And, that was good. But I think, through my pregnancy and through the early days with my son, he felt like that was maybe an opportunity somehow to repair his relationship with his mother, and invited her kind of to come see our son. And, it was really interesting. It was really the first time I had spent time with his family. And I say time, it was all of 3 days before we had to literally throw her out of our house because she became very physically violent and threatening towards our son. Oh, and it was just, it was heartbreaking to see, like, it broke him, it broke him.
Well, and it's one thing to hear about it, and it's another thing to see it.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And here I was, living it with him, but also feeling the repercussions for him,
Right.
And, obviously he really distanced himself from his family, which, he was raised in he's Hispanic. And so he, there's definitely the guy takes care of the mom forever type of a thing. The son takes care of the mom. And, he really wrestled with the guilt of having to cut his mom out for his own sanity. And of course, then his extended family, because there was always this, trying to pull back in. And, his mother, kind of not happy with the damage that she had already done, had then called my family and, talked a whole, and, these people had never met. We didn't have any kind of we both had former marriages, so we didn't have any kind of big wedding. So our families had never met. And, he was crushed by that when he found out, oh my goodness, you're now, it planted that seed for him of, now I can't trust my family, but I can't trust your family either.
Right. And now you're getting a very intimate look into the dysfunction.
Exactly. Absolutely. And yeah. And, it was interesting because at that point, so a few years later, my daughter was born, and and I think, he had been living with this kind of uncertainty of, who loves me, who accepts me. My family clearly left. I don't really know if Stacie's family, how they feel about me now. And, and of course our second child comes, it's a daughter, and I can immediately see that trigger, right. Of that memory of his first daughter.
Right.
And things start to unravel for him at that point. And I, all of a sudden, he is showing outward anger towards neighbors, towards friends, never towards me at this point. We're many years into our relationship, And, he had never really turned that anger towards me, but his anger towards other people is becoming scary.
Right.
And
He's sort of like in this pattern of escalation.
exactly, right? And so it's starting with those outside sources. And of course, that begins kind of that isolation, right? Turning friends away, not wanting to connect anymore, not wanting to have friends around, and finding those excuses as to why not, right? And it's all coming out through anger. Um, we had, at that time, our son was about to start kindergarten, and so we moved not many miles up the road to a house that was a little bit bigger and in a better school district for us. And it was, it was a big job. It was something we kind of had to gut the whole house and kind of redo it. And it was interesting because he had this project, something to throw himself into, and it kind of quelled that anger. And looking back, it's pretty obvious to me now that it was like he felt useful again. And, he felt, even though he was an amazing father and a great husband and, did all of our laundry and cooked and, learning games with our kids, he, all of these little seeds that had been planted of, oh, you're not supporting the family, or, whatever insecurities his mother had planted, and then even unknowing strangers in their completely neutral comments about being a stay-at-home dad had somehow, chipped away at that self-esteem.
Right. And I think too, one part of an abusive personality can be feeling so out of control internally that then they try to externalize that and control their environment, control people around them so that they can quell or like get some sort of sense of peace internally.
Yeah.
And I kind of am hearing some of that in how you were describing his behavior. Like, oh, now I have a project again. I have something I can control. I can feel calm again inside.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. And I think it's also part of that like self-regulation, right? That when you're feeling anxious or depressed, and if you can find ways to self-regulate, being active,
Right.
and finding purpose, of course, is a huge one.
Right.
Then you can kind of either heal and or push down. And of course, in his case, all he was doing was pushing it down. And
Right.
of course, what
temporarily distracting himself.
Right, exactly. And just like a volcano, at some point that comes out. And it did. It was probably, gosh, two or so years later. The house was in a good place. Our son was in second grade, or maybe third grade. Our daughter had started kindergarten, and he found himself with a lot of time on his hands. And I think that those feelings of abandonment, those feelings of, lack of purpose, and just merely not being able to distract yourself from what's happening mentally for you, just bubbled up. I had come home from a business trip one night, and, we put the kids to bed and we're getting ready for bed. And the next thing I know, he was on top of me, pinning my hands under his knees and choking me. And, I didn't really understand what was going on. And of course, all of a sudden I could smell his breath. He had clearly been drinking. He was drunk. And, he became really violent and was choking me to the point where I was almost blacking out, and then he'd give me air. And, it was like when people say, this Jekyll and Hyde personality.
Right.
It's like, whoa, this was the first time that I really saw this person emerge. And it was terrifying.
Well, and I want to stop too and just point out, I so appreciate you really being honest about the trajectory of your relationship and how you spent many good years with this person. And I think we have certain ideas about abusive dynamics and how they unfold that are not always true or applicable, and that this person had never been violent or towards you for years, and I think that's important to remember. There were potentially red flags there that you were noticing, but
Mm-hmm.
they can always be excused away, when you feel like you understand where that person is coming from. And then for it to escalate so quickly in such a short amount of time
Right.
for you, it's just so disorienting, so jarring. And and there's so many good years behind it. There's so many good years behind it that it's just got to be so incredibly confusing.
I think that's dumbstruck, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're right. There's certainly red flags, but so many of us have past traumas or past things that come up that kind of affect you, or anxiety, or all of these things that can affect us that we could work through, right? So when you don't witness the violence, when you don't firsthand, or you see bursts of anger and then all of a sudden get them under control, and
Right.
then in such a violent kind of first time, it's not like, to your point, the trajectory wasn't, oh, he was hitting me, and then he was hitting me harder, and then he was almost choking the life out of me. It was
Right.
it kind of went from 0 to 10 in a split second. And
Right.
and yeah, dumbstruck, definitely. And I'm glad I kind of had the wherewithal the next day to take some photos of the damage
Mm.
that he had done. My neck, and certainly there was bruising all over my body from, just certainly me fighting back, and the struggle of that whole evening. Um, and his response was kind of interesting. It was like, my intent wasn't to hurt you or to kill you. I just wanted answers. And, I really got it stuck in my head that you were going to leave me. And I felt like that was the only way you were going to be honest with me.
Hmm.
Wow. Yeah. So,
It's just, when you have so much love and compassion for someone, when you know what they've been through, what their past traumas are, for the language to be manipulated in that way, it really, it is a bit of a form of gaslighting, where it makes you, as the person who's been harmed, really second guess yourself. And
yep.
I'm struck by like the starkness of the escalation, and I'm kind of like right there with you in that part of the story. I'm like really feeling that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I this is silly, but my company we had an appearance like later that week on the Today Show. So I was
Right.
like, oh my goodness, right? How am I going to mask what happened to me so I can get through
Right.
this, right? And I sat with it for a while, for a few weeks, and I was like, you know what, this is dangerous. And I called the police. And
Yeah.
and they came and they arrested him. And gosh, just stereotypically, but for a reason, you just go, wow, what have I done? Like, he was facing some pretty serious charges. And I panicked. I had 2 young kids. I had this career. He was taking care of my children. I had no one else to help. And he begged me, just give me a second chance. This will never happen again.
Well, in history, those years spent with somebody, that means something,
Exactly.
that's in time invested in each other and in your family that you built together, in the house that he literally built,
Right.
and for all of that to be turned on its head in a second, like nobody is hardwired to want to, like, our brains have a hard time understanding the gravity of those types of situations. Like, sometimes in order to keep us safe, our brains will immediately move to minimize, like, oh, no, 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 it wasn't that bad, because that's, it's too scary to live in that reality. So it makes total sense that your brain wanted to go back,
Right.
and remember all of the good times and not focus on that incident.
Exactly. And I did what so many women do. And I, recanted my story. I refused to, kind of testify or talk to DAs, but, the legal system does, I'm very blessed by the legal system here in Boulder County, certainly.
Right.
They don't just take that at, as okay, never mind, we're not going to press charges. They move forward with it. And, the outcome was what I thought was probably the best outcome, or at least that's what my mind thought at that time, which was he, had to be sober for 2 years, and he had, community service, and there were 2 separate therapists that he needed to see. And,
right.
I thought, oh my gosh, okay, like here it is. He comes from this, background where therapists are not something that you do, especially as a male.
Right.
It's you man up and swallow it. And, now he was being forced. And I thought, oh my goodness, great. This is wonderful. And certainly, the co-disorder of the alcohol abuse doesn't help anybody. And certainly was spurring on all of those underlying emotions that he had. So I thought, wonderful.
Right. And I appreciate that nuance there too, that it's like, no, it wasn't like the alcohol turned him into this other person. He had a lot of other issues going on that, alcohol is only going to make worse.
Exactly. I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, it's just because they're an addict. People don't become addicts because life is great. People become addicts because there's underlying trauma. And unless you deal with that underlying trauma, the addiction, the addictive personality, the escapism isn't going to go away.
And it's a mind-altering substance, and if it's abused over time, that's going to erode away at like different, potentially other healthy coping mechanisms and that kind of thing.
100%. Absolutely. And, it physiologically can change the brain.
Right.
Right. And so, life was, I got to say, life was for about 1.5 years of that 2 years. Life was good. He was doing the work. He was, trying his best, and, he was trying to be, so there, a saying that, kind of struck me is, there was this Jekyll and a Hyde, and it wasn't the man he was pretending to be versus the man he is. It was more about the man he wanted to be versus the man he believed himself to be.
Oh, that's a really powerful distinguishment. That language is really powerful.
Yeah, he wanted to be that family man. He wanted to be the one to break that generational trauma. He wanted to step up and be the man that I believed he was capable of being.
Sure.
But the, what we eventually came to find out, the borderline personality, the PTSD, the depression, those, convinced him that he was none of those things, that he was, in his words, a piece of shit who came from shit. And, no matter how much he fought, and, they always say, fake it till you make it. And he tried, he gave it his best effort, but that, that little devil.
That's not healing. Faking it till you make it is not the same thing as genuine healing or progress or growth.
Exactly. Absolutely. And, it was a therapist of mine at one point who said, here's the thing. He has no coping mechanisms. He was, he grew up not seeing any healthy coping mechanisms. So the amount of work that he would have to put in to actually change is, would take yet another lifetime.
Right.
So, life kind of quieted down, and then eventually, the handcuffs, so to speak, I mean, metaphorically and physically, were off, and he started drinking again, and life started to get a little like, or are we teetering towards that edge again? What's going on? You saw
And as someone who knows him so intimately, I'm sure you could like sense it, and feel it.
Right, that intuit, that like, oh boy, something's going to happen and I don't know what it is type of a thing. Interestingly enough, work for me at the time, I, was a executive at this company that I had worked with for so long, and the atmosphere there had become really toxic. You want to talk about things like gaslighting and love bombing and and abuse. I mean, that was happening at work. And I thought, my goodness, this is toxic. I need to leave. And retrospectively, I think it's pretty interesting how it was showing up in so many different places of my life. And I was like recognizing that it was happening at home. But also, it's obviously a little bit easier to disconnect from a career. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. And I left that company to start kind of my own business, which is really great. It also meant I would be working from home. And I thought to myself, oh, well, this is fabulous, right? Because here I'm going to be here. I'm going to be able to support him. And, I can tell that he's kind of teetering on this edge and having me around, because some of his anxiety and his fear of abandonment was, I traveled so often for work and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be grounded. I can, help with the kids and some of these other things of, dealing with the house that overwhelm him now. And wow, yeah, I was wrong. Instead, I left work in October of 2018. By November of that year, there were about 2 times when he had become so drunk during the day that he had kicked me. And I thought, oh no, here we go again. Like it's going to escalate. Like, thank goodness I had these little warning signs. And, and I I connected with some friends online. I, had a friend in Philadelphia where I'm from and a friend here in Colorado. And I kind of connected to the 2 of them. And I said, guys, I'm experiencing some weird stuff. I'm really kind of scared for me and the kids. So, if you get a weird message from me, that's my SOS, right? And we had kind of developed a language, kind of a secret language of I need help.
Which is so smart. I think so many survivors they're so creative with how they keep themselves safe. Yeah. They know their situation better than anyone, even if their partner isn't outwardly in any given moment harming them. Their guts tell them, and give them a lot of information, a lot of cues. Yeah. And it's just so, not that anyone should have to do that, but I am really, often like blown away by how resilient and how good survivors are at keeping themselves safe. The fact that you could put that safety plan and that little safety mechanism into place is because you could tell, exactly. Is very, it's very amazing.
Yeah. And, because, in that month that I had been home, he had become very controlling and was going through my phone, wouldn't let me be on my phone without there to witness every move that I make. He had to hear every phone call and see every email, which, I knew at that point, this isn't going to end well. This is troublesome. So when he was, passed out drunk, I used Instagram. He wasn't very tech savvy and he stayed off of social media. So I used Instagram, DMs to connect to my friends because he didn't know how to get there. And, that was critical for my survival, ultimately, because he had, the violence was starting to grow. And then there was one morning he was up at 4:00 in the morning, had started drinking, and those were some of the patterns. He wasn't sleeping at all. Of course, lack of sleep is certainly another one of those things. He wasn't eating either. So talk about getting dysregulated. And he was drinking heavily. This morning he had gotten drunk at 4:00 in the morning and had woken me up and pulled me into the living room and was begging me to kill him. Just put a pillow over my head and kill me. I can't take this anymore. I want to go be with my dad in heaven. I don't want to be here anymore. And, that was enough of a signal for me to go, yeah, this is a problem. I laid there with him and kind of consoled him and rocked him to sleep and, got the kids up and left for school. And I thought, oh my God, I'm out of the house without him. And I had called my friend in Philadelphia who, is in education. And I said, I don't know what to do. I'm out of the house. This is my chance. This is it. Like if I go back, something bad's going to happen. I'm out. I'm safe. What do I do? Because I wasn't thinking. And she said, go to the school, turn around, go to the school. Schools are, a safe to tell place.
Right.
If you and the kids are in danger, they have to do something about it.
And they have resources and they're connected to the community and yeah.
Exactly.
And I also, I wanted to point out too, just a little bit of education. There is a huge relationship between suicidality and homicidality when it comes to domestic violence that most of us don't know about.
Exactly.
And when an abusive person is showing those suicidal tendencies, that is often a red flag that things could escalate to homicide very quickly.
Exactly. And I had done my reading and I had done my research and I had just come across an article that said exactly that. And the second he said, just put a pillow over my head, kill me, I want to be gone, I thought, oh shit, this is not real. This is life or death. And I went to the school. They managed to get me and the kids into a shelter, which was phenomenal. And he kind of figured this all out pretty quickly and thought, oh boy, yeah, this isn't going anywhere really good. Now, of course, I had spoken to the police as well. The school had gotten me into the shelter, but police came as well and kind of interviewed me and talked to me, and they were kind of deciding if there was enough there to do anything with the few times he had kicked me, that sort of thing.
Right.
And they said, go to the shelter, stay there for as much as possible. Of course, one of the tricky things is I was running my own business at the time and I needed internet and the shelter does not provide internet. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is how, it sent me to this place of panic. I had also then gotten a message from my husband who said, yeah, I get it. This has gone too far. I'm going to check myself into rehab. So I used that opportunity to go back home. We had a dog. So the poor dog was there. So I had to, kind of help care for the dog because he left for rehab and I couldn't take the dog to the shelter. So I thought, okay, I could be safe. He was supposed to be in this rehab for 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And a week later, he was out. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this isn't good. And I said, look, you can go anywhere you want, but you can't come here. He had gone to our bank account, taking out a large sum of cash, had checked himself into a hotel. And about 2 days later, the police had called me and said, we have enough to arrest him. I said, that's great. He is in outpatient therapy and this is where he'll be. So they arrested him, but of course with that cash on him, he had enough to bail himself out and go to the hotel. Of course, then this is all now in front of a judge who says, you know what? Yep, protection order against Stacie. He can't come anywhere close to her, but he's still the father of those kids. And they granted him unsupervised visitation rights.
Yeah, I just want to pause for a second too and acknowledge how much harder leaving abusive relationships are when you have children with that person. It just complicates everything. And, just because someone is abusive towards, a partner doesn't mean they're always abusive to the kids. So then the kids are sort of in the middle, and it becomes obviously traumatic and confusing for them. But then when you get involved with the justice system, parental rights are a big deal, and they're very reluctant to take those away from people, which part of me understands. But also, when someone is violent, and puts their family at risk, like that's, they have sort of, the consequences should be that they lose their certain rights to be a parent.
Absolutely.
Seems logical, but
yeah. And it's so interesting, I had called child protection, and I, because of course at that point, because I had gone to the school, Child Protection Services was involved, and they were being incredibly helpful. And I was like, no, like this can't happen, because I know him enough to know if he's talking about suicide, that mama bear instinct goes, nope, he's going to get those kids, and that's going to be some sort of either bargaining chip, or he's going to go get so drunk and he's going to, start speeding down I-25 at a million miles per hour and run into a tree. Like, I just, nope, not going to happen. And, I called my CPS caseworker and said, like, this can't happen. What do I do? I had to leave a message, and apparently my message got lost. And, so I'm sitting there in a kind of oh shit moment. And of course, then he's calling, threatening, saying, if you don't let me have the kids, I'm going to use this against you. I'm going to take custody of the kids. I'm going to bring charges against you, saying you kidnapped them. I have this right.
And people with, abusive personalities do not like the feeling of losing control. And if they feel like their power, their control is being threatened, or that it'll be taken away, it often escalates them.
Absolutely.
So that's a critical moment for you, because you've sort of, you're trying to take his children away. And
right.
I'm sure he didn't like that, but also, protection orders are amazing. And I think in a lot of situations, they are a form of accountability, but it's just a piece of paper, and if that person is still at large and knows where you are, if they're out in the community, they're not locked up, like that's incredibly dangerous time, an incredibly dangerous time for survivors.
Exactly.
And I'm sure you felt it.
Well, yeah. And, here's what happened next. He showed up to my house, and he said he had not been drinking. He said, I have a right to these kids, and, I want them now. And I said, well, you can't take them out of this house, and I knew, right, because the justice system can go a number of different ways. I knew I was putting myself in danger by, putting my foot down,
right,
not only with him, but also with the legal system, right? Should he then, file for divorce and custody, this could go a very different way. And, but, I had to go with that mama bear instinct. And, I said, yeah, they're not leaving this house. And he said, well, then I'm coming in. And I said, okay, I guess, because at this point, I don't remember much of what happened that night, other than he did tell me that he was we had put the kids to bed, and I said, you got to go. And he said, well, I am going, but not how you think. I'm going to kill myself. He had a bag of like Vicodin and Percocet, that sort of thing, that he had collected for years from, various, whatever, tooth, I don't know, whatever, various operation, mouth surgery and things like that. And I thought, oh, okay, well, no, I don't think that that's a great idea. I think we can, get through this, and, you're making a big deal out of this, and, calm down. And I tried to, fight, flight, freeze, or appease, right? My appease was, calm him down, get him to a place of safety. And he had then, he grabbed me, he pushed me into the basement, and he said, and here's the thing, I am dying tonight, and so are you. And yeah, that
Yeah.
started, a physical assault. I was put on the ground, hands under his knees, and he was just wailing on my face, knocked my teeth out, broke most of the bones in my face, just really, and was strangling me. The last thing I remember of that particular moment was, spitting my teeth out and looking at him and saying, "You fucker." And then he strangled me until I blacked out.
Mm.
The next thing I know, I don't really know how this happened other than some recounting of my son. I was hiding in a neighbor's backyard at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was 7 degrees Fahrenheit. I had managed to get both kids out. We were all in our PJs. And I had called 911. So,
Which Mama Bear is right. Like that will to live. I'm just like, oof, I'm feeling the emotion of this moment right now. I'm like, wow, you are so strong to somehow, even in some sort of,
right.
moment of unconsciousness, still manage to get your kids out and call the police. Like, just absolutely wow.
Exactly. And
Wow.
apparently I had called 911 on my phone, and then hung up and like stashed my phone in the basement. So I was on my son, I guess my son says he ran back in the house to get his phone, which is like, wow, for
Mm-hmm.
a then 11-year-old to have to do is pretty intense.
Right.
I was clearly battered and bloody. So, apparently I had to chase my daughter around, who was 7 at the time, because she thought I was a monster, right? She didn't know I
Right.
was
That's so
mommy.
scary. Yeah,
Yeah,
God.
and I guess I somehow grabbed them both and just dragged them out of the house and managed to find a backyard that was open. So,
So the police intervened.
yeah, it started, a 7-hour, what they call standoff, right? I was taken to the hospital. The kids went to the police station. They took amazing care of them. And I had my son's phone on me, managed to like load Instagram because who knows anybody's phone numbers anymore?
Right.
I didn't know any friends' phone numbers. I managed to load Instagram on his phone, sign into my Instagram account, and message my 2 friends and say, "Hey, kids are at Erie PD, and I'm at this hospital. Can you help?"
Mayday.
Right? Exactly. SOS. This is it.
This is it.
And so he had slit his throat from ear to ear, and was bleeding out in our bed. But the mixture of the alcohol and I guess maybe he took some
The
of those
pills.
pills, had slowed
Yeah.
his heart rate so much that even though our house was full of blood, he managed to live. He survived.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they took him to, when they finally broke down the front door of my house and pulled him out and got him into emergency surgery, and then took him to jail, where he was then charged with attempted murder, amongst other things.
Sure.
And ultimately he sat in jail, kind of awaiting trial. There was one court appearance that I did have to go to, and he asked to make a statement. The judge looked at me like, "Do you want him to do it?"
Right.
And my instinct said, "Yeah, let him talk." And he kind of admitted everything right there and apologized to me. And 3 days later, he was dead. So he had suicided in jail.
In jail. Okay.
Yeah. So,
What can I just ask what was that moment like for you? I mean, I'm sure that there were so many different emotions probably, but were you relieved, not relieved, horrified, all of the above?
all of the above, definitely. I
Yeah.
think, one of my friends put it really well. Like, you're not only grieving the man that you lost when he became violent, but you're also like, now, like, you had already started to grieve him, and now you have to grieve both men, and that's, wow, that's a hard place to be,
Right.
certainly. but it was interesting because it was my son who really offered perspective to me. And while he was horrified, he was also, and he had still had so much anger towards his dad, towards what had happened. But he said, you know what, Mom, my worry is gone, because not only do I not have to worry anymore about what happens if he gets out of jail, I also don't have to worry about him in jail.
Right.
Yeah.
That's some deep shit
Yeah.
for a kiddo. Wow.
Right? Exactly. Oh my goodness.
So wise.
So wise. I know, my old soul there.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And it's been an interesting journey, because I think I was talking to my therapist, and so kind of randomly I said, God, I just don't know like where I fit anymore. Like, I had already found Stevie and We Are Her, and was kind of looking towards that community for support from the violence and surviving that. And then all of a sudden here I am, a widow, and I was looking for support there as well. And I said, gosh, I feel like this weird, like all of a sudden, because I have these two things, I don't necessarily fit into any group. And, she said, kind of, off the cuff, she said, I just read this interesting book by Laura Lynn Jackson, who is a medium. She said it might be worth a read. And so I did read it, and it's called The Light Between Us, and just talking about kind of mediumship and what happens when we die. And I did kind of a deeper dive. I thought, oh, this is interesting, and it was really comforting in a way that I had never expected. And had found some other, mediums, certainly some that were closer to the Denver area. One of them, Deb Shepard, who, was giving a talk in Boulder. And I thought, wow, that would be so interesting. So I went and I heard her talk and tell her story. And, she became a medium after her husband suicided. And she wrote this book called From Grieving to Believing. And, I read it, and it was so helpful, just talking about how to help your kids through this type of, through a loss, but also through a loss of suicide. And
it is its own specific kind of trauma.
It is. It really is. And, I think the other thing I found, there's, a couple of support groups on like Facebook that deal with, widows who've lost their partners to suicide. And it's so interesting, because once you really hear stories of, how they lost and why they lost and what was happening up until then, while the abuse may not be as strong or, as present, and in some cases it's, almost exactly my story to a T, there's people don't suicide because, just like people don't become addicts or alcoholics because they don't have trauma. People don't suicide because they don't have trauma. Right. And so it was so, healing and interesting for me to kind of be part of this group and, kind of look back. It gave me a really interesting point of view when I looked back from as a survivor of domestic violence. What it allowed me to do was kind of acknowledge where I hadn't really acknowledged or forgave him from, now that he was dead, now that he couldn't hurt me anymore. I was able to forgive him in a way that was so healing and therapeutic for me, because I really was able to acknowledge and accept the trauma that brought him to that place to begin with, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it makes complete sense. And I appreciate that. Well, your description of forgiveness was not about him, really. It was about what you needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, especially when someone is deceased, I mean, forgiving them at that point is really about kind of what you need in order to heal.
Exactly. And it feels bad to say out loud, but the reality is his taking his own life was a gift to me, because it allowed me to, certainly there was fear and trauma and, the anxiety that comes along with, what happens next, that constant fear of, is he going to be able to hurt me? And when he wasn't, it really allowed me to get through those emotions, not bury them.
Right, like achieve a sense of safety, like actual practical physical safety, and start re-regulating and get that nervous system to come down and get out of that survival mode so you can have, process those emotions. And when you're in survival mode, that rational brain is shutting down. You are trying to survive, and it's hard to do anything but just survive moment to moment when you're in that headspace. And if he had not died by suicide, you would have potentially been locked in a control in a control struggle, a power struggle with him for a lot longer.
Exactly. And and even the worry of what his life would be, and if he would be able to heal, and if he would have those resources available to him. And so after he had passed away, I guess he had written kind of a fake or a dummy suicide note to leave at the jail that really didn't talk about me or the kids or anything. And the detective, of course, had found that and had shared that with me. And I thought, my goodness, like, this isn't him. This doesn't sit right with me. And several weeks later, I got this package in the mail, and he had written like 3 composition books full of notes for me and the kids. And it was notes of apology and notes of, love, and notes of, like, this is what I was dealing with. And it was so interesting to me. So his cellmate had managed to smuggle them out of jail and mail them to me. And I think he did that thinking that the police wouldn't give me, these books, which they probably would not have. So, I got this amazing gift from him, which was, detailing exactly the pain and the trauma that he was dealing with. And it was so incredible that in that moment, when he had kind of decided, this is it, I'm done, and started writing it, that, he was finally in that moment able to understand, detail, and process that trauma in a way that he had never done before.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, what, I hear you talking about mediums and things. I do think it feels, that type of gift can feel a healing to know that someone before they have died has been able to process and do some healing of their own. So, if you believe in an afterlife, maybe not taking that with them.
Right. Exactly. And I'm amazed and floored at how much that really allowed me to process everything and to think about forgiveness in such a different way, and to think about mental health in such a different way. And then to really start to identify how, certainly survivors, we all now carry a new trauma with us, and how important that is to really heal and process. And, I don't love the saying everything happens for a reason, because I think it's kind of a silly platitude, but I think, in going through this, I think it's more about, like, bad things happen, and if you can find some good that comes from them and find a way to take this bad situation and turn it into something where you can then be of service and, help other people. Obviously, what you, Emily, and Stevie are doing with We Are Her is, just one of those ways that you can process trauma and help people who are going through it and be of service. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm hearing, as you're speaking, this theme of connection.
Mm-hmm.
That is so important, the connecting with the We Are Her community, connecting with the groups of widows who've experienced a partner who's died by suicide, in the connection with mediums I'm just trying to touch on that really, really important theme of connection. And it feels like in all of this, that is one of those, most healing modalities.
Absolutely. And, certainly isolation, I think, is something that we all experience when we go through this, right? Certainly the type of abuse that you can go through can kind of define that isolation. Sometimes it's just, a self-isolation of shutting down after something happens. And sometimes it's, at the hands of our abusers as part of the manipulation and abuse. And I think that's exactly what's so important, is finding that connection when you are on the other side of it, because that's where healing sits.
Yeah, that's such a deeply important message. And I want to just thank you for being so open and for being so honest, for being so vulnerable with your sharing and generous with your sharing. I feel really honored to be on the other side of receiving that story. I just yeah, you're such a beautiful person. I can't even see you because we're on this stupid internet app, but I can feel your energy in this conversation, and it's just really, you're such a beautiful, beautiful person.
Well, thank you so much. And, thank you for allowing me to share this. I just, I think, and, it's something going forward as, humans, that healing is so important early on. And, having these conversations and allowing people to hear them is so important, because what I don't think people necessarily understand is, they have this idea of an abuser who is this monster, right? And they are this monster. But that monster inside of them came from somewhere, right? It came from something that happened to them, or something they experienced, or something they witnessed. And if we don't acknowledge that and make mental health a priority and something that is not taboo and, should be started in our schools, mindfulness and ways to self-regulate when we're feeling anxious or depressed, or when we're scared, or, just understanding the, how the nervous system works. And those things are so important that we should be teaching in schools, and we should be giving kids access to, what are growth mindsets, and how can you use your mind to heal yourself, and use your heart to heal yourself. Because if we don't, you just see what's happening now in the world, abuse, and, you look at the narcissistic personalities, or some of the, some of the mental health issues, they just seem to be growing. And, it's exponential, not to use the comparison to, what's happening right now. We're on this platform, but like the coronavirus, it's this growth is exponential. And mental health is that way too, for survivors, it's so important to find ways to not only heal ourselves, but heal anybody, our kids or people who are close to us who've also been impacted, because that's just setting up generations. And, that's certainly becoming, something that's so important to my purpose moving forward, is to make mental health awareness something that we talk about, and, future generations just accept, and don't push it down, and don't, quote unquote, man up.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've done a bad job of that as a society, but I do think that things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it in large part comes from the bravery of people like you and Stevie and all the survivors out there, and people who aren't survivors, just being courageous enough to be vulnerable, to share stories, to have these difficult conversations, to not ignore. And the more that we do that, the better off we're going to be collectively.
Exactly. Yep. You got it.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you so much again. And before we kind of end recording, I always like to give one kind of final opportunity for guests to share any message that they would want a survivor listening to hear.
I think certainly, as a survivor, the fact that you are in the position to be a survivor is amazing, and you should be proud of yourself. But not only that, your healing is so important, and, to really do the work and understand that can look like so many different things. It's important to find healing modalities that work, that connect. And if they're not, it's okay to keep exploring. I think the thing that worked for me so much is something that, my therapist, who I love so much and has helped me so much, has just, on this sidetrack note, kind of pointed me in a direction that opened me up to something else and this whole other world. You just have to be open to finding what works for you from a healing point of view, and, own it and dig deep. And, there's better stuff waiting on the other side of healing.
I love that. I really love that. And it's such an important message. I think I've heard from a lot of guests on the podcast that we're often, as survivors, told how to heal. And that in and of itself is very disempowering. It does the opposite of what, it's actually more detrimental to healing than it is helpful. And that's why I really appreciate your openness and your honesty about how you have found healing and what that looks like to you, because there is no perfect modality for everyone.
Right.
It is not a one size fits all situation. And I think we as survivors can often get wrapped up in that idea. And I love that. I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, I think, what worked for me was something that I think a lot of people, look at me and have said to me, oh, that feels like grasping for straws. And it's I had somebody else say to me, well, don't you feel shame for that? And I thought, wow, no, no, I don't, and you've got to own it, and you've got to be okay with people not understanding your healing. And
right.
There are people out there who will, to go back to that point of connection, and you've got to just kind of keep digging deep to find your crew, right? To find the people,
right?
To find your tribe, the ones who jive with you and who are going to help you get to that place.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there are people out there to receive you. Yep. For any survivor listening. I mean, obviously We Are Her is here, but there are so many communities, sometimes locally, that you can tap into. There are other resources online. But yeah, you're not alone.
Exactly.
And find those people that you can connect with, because that is just, it can be instrumental in taking you to the next level of healing.
100%. Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up. But again, just thank you so much for your generosity in your sharing. And we feel really, really lucky to have you on the podcast and to get your story out.
Well, thank you so much to you and Stevie and the We Are Her family. You're definitely a soft place for me to land, which is so important. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's really nice to hear.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Be sure to subscribe and don't forget to check out our online community at weareher.net. If you or someone you know has experienced abuse or assault, you can always call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233.